Hi, I'm Bob Krieg of These Old Farts. We're doing a special this tonight, which is a little different than we've done before. We've invited Ken Gordon, the state rep from Bedford and Burlington, to join us to explain several bills that are in front of the state legislature that kind of represent some controversy that's going on nationally as well. So one of the bills that we're talking about is the Safe Cities Act, which Ken was a co-sponsor of, and could tell us a little bit about what's happened with it and what else is going on in that area. And he'll also talk about some of the other things that are going on in the legislature and how they might affect us. So Ken?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me on to this Old Farts. It's the first time I've been on your show, and I've been looking forward to it, and I think we're going to have a good time talking about it. Thank you both for the discussion. So it's actually called the Safe Communities Act, and it's a bill that was filed in the Senate by Senator Jamie Eldridge and in the House by Senator Juana Matias. In addition to the legislation that was filed in January of 2017, there was a Supreme Court case that came down called Commonwealth versus Lunn. And the issue that concerned me before the Supreme Court case was decided, which is to say when I co-sponsored the House version, which later became the Senate version, was that there was at least one sheriff in the South Shore that announced that he would like to bring, or he was willing to bring, prisoners from the state prison system to Arizona to build a wall at our expense, at Massachusetts' expense. I continue to believe that our state tax dollars should not be used to carry out federal immigration policy or federal policy at all. And it goes beyond immigration. I'm a trial lawyer, and as we all know, we have state courts, we have federal courts, we have state crimes and federal crimes, and when someone gets caught having or gets arrested and goes through the process in the federal system, the federal government pays for that court system. They go to Boston, they get tried, and then they go to a federal court if they're convicted. State, same thing. State system, they go to a state prison if they're convicted. Well, we've seen and I think it's because of politics. It's because of the excitement, or the fervor on both sides of this issue, that we have state officials that are trying to blur the line. And there are these agreements called 876G agreements, where the state can, or state parties can contract with the federal government to do that work. The problem again is that according to the federal government does not pay for does not reimburse the state. And that bothered me. And so that was the part of this Safe Communities Act bill that concerned me the most. I think it's more like a Bill Belichick bill. Do your job. We do our job. Mm-hmm. The federal government won't let us legislate in the immigration arena. That's called preemption. That's their job. And we should not be using our tax dollars. We're stretched thin enough to do that type of work. For me, when the Lunn case came out, the Lunn case said specifically you cannot use state employees to do federal work. If I could back up for a little bit, one thing that our viewers might be familiar with is that we just had some work done on Route 128 that added a lane at the Route 3 exit, making traffic a little bit easier. Well, that work was done by Mass Department of Transportation, MassDOT, but it was funded by the Federal Highway Administration because it's a federal road. It's a U.S. highway. We didn't fund it, they did. We managed it. That's the way it should work. That's the way it should work with highway, with transportation. Is the way it should work with immigration. It's just no different. And really that's what the SJC found. I think that after that, it became less of an urgency from leadership in the legislature to get this out. There's a lot that's going on in the state today, in the country today, that we are focused in on, and I just think it was a matter of adjusting our agenda to do that. Having said that, the response of the immigration community was to propose to work with, and they have been working with, the chiefs of police. And they've come out with another bill that they intend to introduce, I think, this week, which reflects the compromise. And it deals with one of the aspects of this bill, which is the concept that if a person is held by a state in the state court system or the police on the state level, and whatever they're being held with on the state level is resolved, and they are free to go. The judge, in a case of an arraignment, says, okay, you're free to go. That whether they should be treated the same as everybody else at that point if they can't prove their immigration status, or whether the federal government can require the states to hold them. Okay? Now, if there's a warrant for someone to be picked up, issued by a judge, this bill says a warrant does not apply. That means we honor a warrant. And that's always the case. The state will always honor a warrant.
From the federal government? From the federal
From
court?
a judge.
From a judge, federal court?
Federal court, right?
Okay.
Right. Currently, if there's someone that's that's committed a kidnapping, for example, and there's a judge that says we want this person picked up, there's a warrant. You can still rely on state police to do that, right? The issue in this bill is called a detainer, which is a civil process, not a criminal process. And so it's when the civil process spills over into this immigration, this is what triggers the concern. So if an immigration agent issues a detainer request, which is like me as a civil lawyer issuing a subpoena to somebody to come into a deposition, I can do that. But if I want to enforce it, I have to go to a judge if the person doesn't want to come. So in this case, is there an amount of time that the court or the police can hold someone after they otherwise would let them go? Okay? Understanding that, I know this is a little complex, but if a person has committed a crime, a violent crime, it's unlikely they're just going to be let go. They're going to be, they're not going to be let go on their personal recognizance generally. There's generally going to be a bail set. There are going to be conditions to bail if it's a violent crime, it's something serious. Certainly if it's a terrorist act, probably they're going to end up in the federal system anyway, but if their first stop is if it's a terrorist act, they're not going to be just let go. So in that case, my interpretation of the Lund case would be, you can still, if the federal government, even on a detainer, says, we want them, you've still got them. You would turn them over. You wouldn't refuse to cooperate. And I think a lot of people think this bill says we'll refuse to cooperate.
But it does not.
It does not.
Oh, okay.
No, it just tells, the bill would say, once the person's through the system, for example, it would be a nonviolent crime, they were pulled over for something, they took care of whatever they needed to take care of, they can go just like anybody else.
See, okay.
Okay? In a situation of a violent crime, that wouldn't happen because they wouldn't be told you can just go. There's going to be some condition to make sure they come back under our system. This new bill that's coming out, one was filed, I think, by the same folks after this compromise, and another one that the governor has introduced. They both go to that issue, and they'll say that under what are the circumstances, let's spell them out, when the state, the court system, the state court system will keep a person, and for how long. So one of the bills is, I think is 6 days, and the other is 12 days. I think it's going to be a matter of negotiating.
So if someone has done whatever was necessary for the judge to say the issue is either resolved or we will take it up at a later time, the local police can still hold that person for 12 days?
Only for certain offenses.
Such as?
Such as something involving violence, something involving terrorism. If you don't mind, I can actually read you the offenses. Yeah. I can say what they are. Sexual assault, sexual abuse, any offense which has the element of active participation in a criminal street gang, assault and battery on a child under 18, firearm-related offense, human trafficking, drug-related offense, drug trafficking offense, any conviction for domestic violence, if the current arrest is for a domestic violence offense, the same thing, and any crime punishable by imprisonment by the state prison that has an element of threat or physical force. So it's a violent crime and terrorism.
So if somebody is, my understanding, just based on the news and President Trump was saying that California, he would not fund, give federal money for any purpose in California because they were not cooperating with ICE. Basically, assuming that that's the same kind of situation, if somebody was stopped for some crime, like speeding or something like that, could the arresting officer or somebody at the station ask their immigration status? And if there was some issue with the immigration status, could they hold them for that reason?
Currently, they wouldn't.
They would.
They would not. If it was like you say, if it was an offense like speeding, they wouldn't hold them.
So that means there will be a distinction between the actual criminal offenses versus regular speeding or stopping at lights or something like that, which local police can prosecute.
Yeah, so to be specific, if there was a detainer request, which is a civil situation, and someone calls the local police and says, hey, I think you got this guy, will you hold him? And it's nothing more than a speeding situation, something in that realm. It's the state, according to the Lund case, is the state has no authority to hold a person at state expense for the federal government unless the federal government gets a warrant. If they get a warrant, then they can, and they must.
So does that mean what we read in the news is that ICE can go in to a courthouse and take people away?
Right.
Can they still do the same?
Yes. Yes.
If
So
they have
that's
warrant.
different. Okay. So now you're asking asking about cooperation. Can they show up in a court and figure out that somebody is there and that person is here without papers, right? Is here improperly.
Okay.
Can they tap that person on the shoulder and say, "You're coming with me"?
Okay.
And the answer is yes.
Okay.
Because that's different than calling the state
I see.
actors
Okay.
and say,
Okay.
"Hold that person," and that happens.
Yes,
And
that's
that
what
happens all the time.
That's what we see on the news.
Right,
Okay.
that happens
Right.
all the time. That doesn't stop. There's nothing in there that says you can't talk to anybody. What it says is that you can't use you can't use state resources in order to do the federal work. Under this compromise, there'll be some flexibility in that, but it's always been that the federal government will know if someone who is violent has been picked up
So
under those.
In the cases that I think that I'm stating, and also Oman might be stating, in some of these cases, the person isn't violent.
Right.
His only crime is that he's here undocumented.
Right, and that in those cases, it's the federal government asking us to do their work for them, and they would not be held.
So if the federal government handed you $10,000, would therefore it be, under this bill, perfectly acceptable to call them up and say, I got somebody, I question their immigration status?
No, they don't do that.
No, but
But
if
no,
they
it
did,
doesn't. It doesn't say in lieu of payment. It doesn't.
Okay.
You can't solve it that way. That's the theory behind why it shouldn't be done, according to the bill that I happen to agree with. That that our tax dollars are our tax dollars and we protect it.
So that means the local police stopping somebody at the intersection cannot suddenly ask, are you illegal, are you legal, and then if he's illegal or she's illegal, immediately take them away and hand them over. That cannot happen.
No.
Okay. So that's what the bill is about,
Right.
rather than anything else. But if the person was involved in a deadly crash,
Right.
for example, then under that condition, it's kind of a little bit altered scenario now.
Right.
And then all bets are off.
Yeah, because now they're being held anyway. The federal government will find out about that. They do. And they're just going to make an arrangement to pick them up. They'll say, well, don't release them. You've got them anyway. Don't release them to the street. Release them to us.
Okay.
And that happens curently, and that would
So
continue to
nothing changes.
Right.
So, but that means that has to be brought out in the publicity somehow. That this does not change the basic norms. Only thing what it changes is this, and the other.
Well, the problem and it's a good question that you ask, because we live in in a world now
Yeah.
where information comes to us from largely a point of view,
Yeah.
one way or the other, and it becomes convenient for political sides
Yeah.
to characterize what's going on, and so they call something like a sanctuary state.
Mm-hmm.
And the image that you draw in a sanctuary state would be that somebody would be running from the law,
Mm-hmm.
would pass the border, in the Berkshires or Rhode Island or have you get in, and all of a sudden, phew, now no one can catch me.
I mean, that's what I had in my mind actually. After reading this, that's what I thought. Well, so does that mean that's what is going to happen? People are going to basically walk into Massachusetts, and we will have suddenly thousands of people show up, and how is that going to play with the legal immigration and all that stuff?
Right.
And
So
all
if-
those things
yeah.
come up.
So the answer is, of course not. We've had dozens of people, INS has taken dozens of people out of Massachusetts in the last year based on their immigration status. We would never stop that. So we can't stop that. I think of the Civil War, and I think that during the Civil War, states tried to say, we're not going to comply with federal law or federal policy, states' rights and all of that. We fought a war over that, and the outcome was, no, we're one nation, and we all comply with federal law, whether we agree with it or not. And this would not put essentially a wall, when you talk about walls, it would not put a wall around Massachusetts and protect Massachusetts residents from a federal law if Massachusetts felt that we needed protection from it, which we don't.
So that means under the larger rubric of sanctuary city, this does not fit in that.
This doesn't say the word sanctuary
Okay.
at all. It's not a sanctuary. It's merely saying that we are not going to allow, for example, prison officials to bring their employees to the Southwest
Okay.
to work on an immigration project at our expense, which is what a sheriff in Bristol County threatened to do. That's what it's saying. It's saying that we are not in that, essentially, that's not a role.
Okay. So going back to Bob's point, then does that mean if the sheriff is paid money from the federal government, then it's legal?
No. Well, the answer to your question is the federal government has already ruled that it will not pay that money.
Okay.
So these contracts that they have, they will not pay. So it's not worth even having that discussion
see,
because the
okay.
federal government doesn't pay, like they do under the Highway Administration for our roads.
How does this situation differ, if it does, from California, which has declared itself a sanctuary state? A lot of the emails that I get indicate that if you commit a violent crime in California and you're illegal, you're home free. The situation where I crossed the Berkshire, I'm now in Massachusetts, and the world's a wonderful place.
Right.
Does California say if you're illegal then you have special protections, or is it similar to what your bill says?
I can't really speak to California, so
Okay.
I can't really. I don't know. I just know what our bill says,
Okay.
and the current bill, what it would say to that, which is no. If you've committed a crime and you come here, the proper authorities will still be able to pick you up, and it just says the proper authority is the federal government
Okay.
in that case, with certain conditions that we've been talking about. Overall, it's really a matter of communication, in my opinion, and it's just too bad that we live in a time where someone is going to, where a political group is going to do something like send a mailer, and many of our viewers are aware that a mailer came into the district a couple of weeks ago, and they're going to mischaracterize a bill rather than fairly talk about what it says, because they realize it will frighten people if people think that we will tell the federal government you can't enforce your laws here. We won't let you. I mean, think about that. If we ever did that, no matter what we may think about immigration, what about the next issue that comes along? What about civil rights issues, other issues that, we'd have chaos in this country if states could pick and choose when they would allow the federal government to come in and do their enforcement work and when they wouldn't. It's just not the way that we could address this.
Okay, so my understanding is if if a warrant exists, which means you know the individual has committed a crime, you know who it is,
Right.
then the state bill has nothing to do with it.
Correct.
It's this idea that I think I think someone has committed a crime, and therefore I'm going to call the appropriate authorities to say, why don't you check on this guy?
Yeah.
As opposed
essentially.
to,
What it is if an immigration official says, I know where so-and-so is, I know where this person is, and I want to get him, and I'm going to ask a judge for the authority to pick him up, and gets a warrant, every state official will honor that warrant. It's,
okay.
you know, you have to, or you're in contempt. And that bill spells that out. It says that's fine. It's when an immigration official has a pad of paper, like I do as a lawyer, you know, so-called a subpoena. The immigration official says, just pick that guy up for us, okay? That's when the state says, well, who's going to pay for that? Who's going to pay for the expense of doing that? Without a judge, they can go get it. They can go get an immigration judge to order it, and then we have to. This is that instance called a detainer.
So that means, again, going back to my ICE example. So that means ICE cannot ask the local police to grab the person from the courthouse. ICE can themselves go and pick them up.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Now, under those certain violent crimes,
Yeah.
they can too.
Okay.
You know, just keep them there, and we'll come get them. But they can't do it forever.
Okay.
Under these new proposals.
I see. Do they have to seek permission to get into the courthouse? Or?
Oh no, it's a public.
Okay.
Courthouses are all public.
Now you talked about some 874G or something.
Right.
What is that?
Well, that's a contract by which the federal government can work with, can enlist a state government to do work for them.
I see. Okay.
So they can say, we want your prisoners to come build a wall.
Okay. And that is perfectly legal?
Yeah, it's legal.
Okay.
We just don't think it's appropriate that
Okay.
we have to go to the expense of doing that.
But they can. But state of Massachusetts can be forced to do that
Right.
under that agreement.
Right.
So that means this bill doesn't prevent that.
No, the bill does prevent that.
Oh, it does prevent that.
Yeah.
But how much of enforcement is that possible? That if there is an agreement overall, then this bill comes in. Does that mean that agreement is null and void?
Yeah, we just wouldn't fund it.
But they can still take the prisoners and build the wall.
if they have a warrant.
If-
No, this is a different issue.
no, this-
Okay.
This is an
Okay.
agreement where the federal government would go to a sheriff and say, we want to use some of your prisoners to do our work for us, right? If the Massachusetts law says you can't do that,
Okay.
that's fine. We could do that.
Isn't there some issue of involuntary servitude where you can grab somebody who's in prison or in jail, there being a difference, and say, while you're here, you're going to go do this job for us, and we're not going to pay you because you're a prisoner. You have no rights. And that kind of...
You're getting into areas I don't know a lot about, but I think once you're in prison, maybe I should say I don't know a lot about this,
Okay.
but I think that once you're in prison, there are things, I mean, they do pay them a little bit, but there are things that they're expected to do while they're in prison. So it could technically be that they have very little, I mean, you think about it, now they're going to be separated from their family, they're going out of state.
Right.
You know, you don't expect when you're in a Massachusetts prison, in the system, that you're going to go around the other side of the country. So I'm not sure how far that goes of an argument, but that's, you know, again, it's, you know, if the federal government wants to do that work, the federal government can do that work.
But they have to pay.
But at their expense. And I know there's been discussion about who's going to pay for the wall. Well, I don't really think that they should be forcing the states to pay for the wall in this way. So, you know, there are parts of it that to me just make sense. And again, the Lund case, the SJC case, and maybe I want to be clear when I say you can do that, this 876G. You really can't, because the Lund case says you
I
can't.
see.
The Lund
Oh,
case says that's unconstitutional.
Oh, okay.
So since that decision came down, you can't.
Since it's a debate between the federal government and the states, it'd be interesting to see what the Supreme Court says.
If it goes to
If it goes.
If it goes on that way,
yeah.
right, right.
I mean, I hadn't been aware of exactly the situation, but it sounds like a good way for the federal government to get around the fact that the Congress has not funded anything for the wall.
Right, right.
Get the states pay and not Mexico and all that.
Right. So what the federal government does with respect to Massachusetts or California or any of these other things, what the the current administration does, I mean, we can't control.
Right.
We've seen things like a tax bill come out that has favorable treatment toward certain states and disfavorable treatment toward what they call industrialized states. And our transportation system really is dependent on funding from the federal government, which I think, well, I know that we're going to be doing with less in funding. So that we hear, tweets or something coming out dealing with these issues, I guess, to the extent of our concern, these tweets seem to change daily. I don't know, but they go as far as they do.
So does that mean the infrastructure for the MBTA, for example, is going to continue to fall apart?
There are various ways that we have that we're trying to address, trying to fix it, but it'll be much, much more difficult to try to keep the MBTA afloat. It has an operating deficit. It's had it for a while. The current administration has put together a fiscal control board to put together a review to make sure that money is being spent as efficiently as possible. And they honestly, I'm on the transportation committee, and they report back to us on every other month, and I think they are making progress. But it's still very difficult. We still have a need for funding. Excuse me. We all agree with that. It's a question of where we're going to get it. And yeah, the federal government's, I should say the administration's point of view with respect to their new tax plan is to allow the states to have more autonomy, more control, more local control, and they package that as a good thing, and it is a good thing, until you get to the point where you say, okay, and then the money that you're going to get is going to be cut. So good luck on your local control.
Okay.
Because, right, you're going to be looking for the money for that. And what are you going to do?
Just as a different way of going about it, at one point there was a New England transportation
Compact.
Compact,
Yeah.
because I think they were involved in doing the Big Dig. Because basically, if you wanted to go from New York to Maine, you basically had to go through Boston, and
Right.
they decided that this was an appropriate thing for everybody in the area. Would that be an alternative where you get around the federal government spending limits by the various states coming up with their own approaches?
Working together with other states is always a good idea. The various compacts that we have are always a good idea. The answer on one level is yes. On the other level is they're facing the same problems that we are. Because we're all the industrialized states. We've all been,
Northeast is the same issues.
yeah. So, but still helping each other out is, and as you say, we're looking into various rail links, which I think are important. Our transportation infrastructure is going to change drastically over the next 20 years, and it's important for us to invest our funding going forward in the places where it's going to do the most good. And that sounds simple. Why not? But we've engaged in studies, and we have experts coming in from the transportation industries talking about how, for example, the autonomous vehicles are going to really just take off, because they already have taken off, and the sort of mushrooming effect in commerce and industry, especially in that arena, is going to drastically change our transportation outlook, and the needs for what we have, our roads and bridges and all that. Well, of course, we still will need them. We've got to fund them differently, because the gas tax is going to be something that we're not going to collect much of. People aren't going to use much gas in this new era of transportation. And cars are going to be there will be fewer and fewer and fewer cars on the road. as a result of that. This new era of transportation is going to involve people who subscribe to transportation service, and the auto manufacturers are already creating this. So people will go to Ford or General Motors or Mercedes or what have you, and rather than own their own car, they'll be subscribing to those manufacturers' network of cars, and they'll call up a ride. Like now we have Uber. This will be Uber without a driver in it, and it'll solve the problem where right now cars are generally on the road about 5% of the time in their garage, the other 95, you can imagine. These vehicles will be on the road 95% of the time and maintained. You know, they're only coming off 5% when they're maintained. So you won't need as many vehicles to get people around. And what, you know, people think, well, that's really science fiction. How is that ever going to, who would ever agree to do that? The auto insurance industry has a key role in this, and they realize that these machines are going to be much safer on the road than the amateur drivers that we are now. And they look at statistics of accidents that occur every day. And some people are skeptical. They say, well, what happens when they crash? The instances of them crashing is so minuscule compared to the instances of us as amateur drivers crashing all the time, texting, drinking, all the things that we do. Eating, talking, all the things that we do that distracts us. And so insurance will start to increase for us as drivers and become pretty much unnecessary for us in the operation of these autonomous vehicles.
Because somebody else will be insuring them.
Right, right. We'll have product liability insurance for the vehicle. It'll be a machine.
I was having a conversation on this very subject Friday with somebody who happens to work at Mapfre, the old Commerce.
Right.
And he's not part of the discussions, but he said that they are trying to figure out how does one insure cars and people in this particular situation. And they really hadn't come up with anything. So,
yeah, there are studies being done by that industry to work with that now. Foreseeing that, you know, that when you look at the instances, you know, the risks, it's gonna be very expensive for people to keep their cars. We will probably have sort of Disney worlds. We'll probably have an amusement park, not and we'll probably have many places people can go and drive their cars around.
I see. Oh. Is there any talk in the legislature about Hyperloop?
About Hyperloop?
Hyperloop between different states?
Yeah, I think that started me on this topic. So rail travel will become very important.
Okay.
Other types of public transportation will be important. The north-south rail link.
Yeah.
I think when you mentioned Maine to New York, we don't have that because you've got to stop at South Station and go to North Station. That'll become real important. These are if you go to Europe, you can go from one city to another in half the time that you can get from Boston to New York or to Washington on a rail.
Yeah.
And we should be able to address that.
well, part of the problem is that because of the car, we no longer have concentrations of people living. It used to be that in a city, everybody lived within the easy walking distance of public transportation.
Right.
So it was really easy to do something about it. Today, we live literally hundreds of miles, well, not hundreds, let's say 50 miles from public transportation, and we expect to be able to go to another place, which may also be 50 miles from public transportation. And if I'm sitting and saying, okay, well, I'll put in a rail link for one person, two people, a half a dozen people, you have to have a concentration of people to make it make sense. And I don't see us giving up our homes or the location of our homes simply so that we can get a rail link. So,
right, and that's why this autonomous network becomes just as important. The rail link is important to connect cities.
Right.
That's true. We're not going to have, it would be inefficient to have stops all along the way. But the autonomous network could get you to that rail link in a way that would be quicker The autonomous network also will be quicker because most of the time that we get stuck in traffic, much of the time, it's because someone's had an accident. And you get past the accident. Well, that will happen rarely once this is in operation.
Well, I think you're spending probably too much time on this, but thinking about it, when I was commuting into Boston, I'd go in at 7 o'clock. Half the world's trying to go in at 7 o'clock. By 9 or 10 o'clock at the time, at least, there was nobody on the road. Or if I went in early, which is what I ended up doing, I would go in at 5 o'clock and I'd go right through. And the problem is everybody still wants to go in at 7 o'clock. So we're still going to need a large number of cars for that specific time. And then the rest of the time they can be parked kind of like they are now.
Yeah, it's changed because, by 9 it's still pretty crowded.
Yes,
Right.
Because many businesses are scattering a little bit. And many businesses have moved out to the suburbs. Here in Burlington, we see that. So we have dissipated the concentration of workers altogether anyway. So, there are many ways that I think we're going to see that people, the other thing is that in the generation coming out of college now, the outlook is different than it was in my generation that came out in the 80s. People are less interested in having their own car and more interested in having that time for themselves to do their work or to engage in social communication with all the social media that's out there and all, and much more interested in public transportation or another form of transportation that'll, like a shuttle, that they can, ride in as a passenger as opposed to as a driver. They want smaller homes, condos. They don't want to have to worry so much about maintenance as I think we aspired to do then. Oh, of course, I'm not speaking for everybody, but there's really just this groundswell of interest among the generation coming out. We have to address that here in Burlington because a lot want to live in Somerville and Cambridge, and it's a place to meet other young people and all that. And I think that always was the case. And again, that now addresses the need for transportation to get out here.
I mean, that's why the younger generation is more interested in leasing cars, which was, I find it kind of amusing that it's a new concept to me, but I find this, everybody I talk to, we lease the car. And it's not only young people now doing it, it's older people also doing the same thing.
Well, I can remember when I was growing up, the thing was you have a new car every 2 years.
Yes.
And leasing is seems to be based on that.
Yeah, that's the propaganda there is that you'll get a new car every 2 years or 3 years, and why not? But somebody's making money out of that.
Well, if they weren't making money, they wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's fair. Okay, there's some other issues. We talked a little about transportation. We talked about the Safe Communities Act.
Yeah.
Are there other issues that
Yeah.
going on?
Yeah. Personally, what I've been focused in on a couple of bills. One's been going on now for 3 years. I filed the bill in the House calling for paid family and medical leave for every worker in Massachusetts.
Male and female.
Yes.
Okay.
What that would do is it would provide a program, under my bill, it would provide a program through an insurance product that would be managed by the state treasurer, where every worker would have a premium put in for them. It would be paid half by the employer, half by the employee. The average wage earner in Massachusetts would be paying $3.42 a week. Into the program. And for that, what they would get is that when they experience the birth of a child, adoption of a child, a serious illness of a spouse or a child, or an immediate family member, a parent or a sibling, for example, they could take up to 12 weeks of leave to care for that family member. If it was their own non-related workplace injury, like a heart attack, they could use this in place of temporary disability insurance. Up to 26 weeks. It provides a portion of their wage replacement For a minimum wage worker, that portion is about 86%, almost 90%.
Wow.
Because my theory is, right, a minimum wage worker can't really have
No.
saved money. But the cap is $650 a week, and the benefit has a sort of a curve. It curves downward. So when you get to the higher wage earners, it's a 30% replacement,
Okay.
not up to 90, to keep the costs manageable. What happened is that the Raise Up Massachusetts folks have also filed a ballot question, and they've got enough signatures that it's likely that it'll be on the ballot, and it polls very well. So the business community has gotten together with the Raise Up Massachusetts folks, the labor folks essentially, and they've been negotiating every other week since November to try to hammer out a compromise that both sides would agree to. And so our bill is still in committee, but we're awaiting the result of these negotiations because ballot questions are great. It's direct democracy. People have access to really proposals that they can put before the voters and they can vote yes or no. It's more sophisticated than that because they'll poll their ideas, and before they invest much into it, they'll see what the outcome would be. And this is a program that polls very, very strongly. But it also gives the opportunity for the legislature to take a look at these programs like this one, where they say, you know what, if we adjust this or that, there's a Senate bill also that pays about 90% flat across the board after 3 years, so it generates enough money to pay this, and with a $1,000 cap, and it's a little more expensive than mine.
It'd be a lot more expensive,
Yeah.
I think.
About $1.50 for
Really?
an average worker per week. Yeah,
So that means $4 something,
yeah, about five.
$5 something
Yeah,
a week.
yeah. The ballot question
So
goes
20
a little
bucks
bit.
a month.
That's amazing that you could do it that inexpensively.
Right.
But
right.
that means it will be mandatory for everybody.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Well, in my bill, you could, if a company wanted to provide this through private insurance, they could.
I see.
California's had this for about 12 years now. New Jersey's had it for about 7. Rhode Island for 5, I think. And New York is just starting now with it. Washington just passed it, so they're in the build-up phase, I should say, about a year ago.
So how has it worked in California?
There's a woman named Jane Waldfogel. She is a professor at Columbia University, and she did a survey in California, in New York, New Jersey as well. And she found that after a little while, the employers that she surveyed, of course the employees are in favor of it. The employers, 67% either favored the program, having experienced it, or were neutral to it.
I see. Okay.
So it's gotten a good reception.
Okay.
My focus after filing it and realizing that the employee side certainly favored it, would be a great benefit to them, was the argument of, well, how about the employers? How about the small employers that are really, they're struggling to make ends meet? How would they be able to handle if they have 10 employees? Now they're looking at, and if they're average paid, no, that's about $50,000 a year in Massachusetts. So many of these little companies aren't. The software companies or financial investment firms, sometimes they're little with respect to employees, but not revenue. But let's talk about the little coffee shops and all that. I was concerned, okay, well, if they've got 10 employees, now they're looking at, $43 a week. How does that affect them? And when I talked to them, even when I talked to the governor about it, he said, it's not $3.43, $3.42. It's $3.42 more.
I see.
Right? It's more than what they're now paying.
Yeah.
Of course, it doesn't sound like much unless you realize what they're paying now. And the question that I have back is, more than what? And when I talked to small business, I said, okay, and the ones that said, we have to pay more than we currently have to pay in fees and overhead and things like that. And I said, well, what do you do now? What do you do now when someone goes out on leave? If someone comes to you and says, I'm going to have a baby, I'm going to take time off, what do you do? And these are companies that are small enough that the federal, the FAMLA doesn't apply to them. So they don't necessarily have to protect the person's job. They certainly don't have to pay them. No one has to pay. What do you do? And they generally say, you know what, we pay him as long as we can because we only have 10 people. They're all very important to us. They've worked there for a time usually. Sometimes they're related to the owners. And we want to keep them here. We don't really want to say, well, all right, if you want 8 weeks off, which you're entitled to under the law, that's fine, but we can't keep you because we need to get the work done. So you'll have to find another job after that. You know, it's very rare that I'll find an employer who's satisfied with that as an answer. Some of them will say, I can't pay them because I don't have the funds to be able to pay for that worker out on leave and pay for someone else to do the work. Excuse me. So they say, but what can I do? I just don't have the money. I said, well, what if it was this premium? And the answer was always, I can do that because I'll budget for that.
Okay.
And
But that doesn't solve the issue of Jane goes out on maternity leave, and so they paid the premium, so they don't have to pay Jane,
Right.
but they got to pay someone else
correct.
The replacement.
a replacement for some period of time, and that replacement is likely to be more expensive.
Not necessarily.
Well, if nothing else, you got to train them, so you have a training cost over and above whatever it costs otherwise.
Maybe, if I can interrupt. Many of these companies are going to extend part-time hours to the people who are already there. When we're talking about the little companies, these are workers they already have, and they'll just work more, and they're not overtime because they're not full-time. So they can do that.
Okay.
Sometimes they can job shift, and sometimes, yes, sometimes it's a new worker, but once they've trained them, oftentimes, oftentimes, once that worker is trained, they'll find something for them to do later. So it again becomes a win-win for them. In the end, usually the employer still has that benefit from being involved with the program. In fact, what we found was this would turn out to be so popular in Massachusetts that the surveys we continued to do, the numbers that we ran were done through 2 economists. I'm really not smart enough to come out with that number myself. And when she spoke with enough employers, she realized that what would happen is in Massachusetts, we still have a number of the high-tech employers that pay a greater percentage of the wage replacement than this program would offer. So they would pay the rest of it. When you go in and look at the California experience or the New Jersey experience, many people who are eligible for this program don't take it. And the reason they don't take it is that they have access to a higher wage replacement in other ways.
Oh, I see.
For example, if they have vacation time they haven't taken yet, they might want that. They'll get
I see.
100% wage replacement, or sick time that they haven't taken that they can earn. Something like that, and they'll put off this until they've got their higher percentage out. If your employer is willing to pay the difference between what we give them and 100% wage replacement, there's no reason to use your vacation time. So that will make this a more popular program. That made it more expensive. So after I filed it in the first instance, where I had a $1,000 cap per week on the benefit, I brought it down to $650 because I had to figure out how to stay within that premium level and still provide the benefit. And I thought, well, the people who could afford, I think it was more fair to provide a reduced benefit to the people who are making the most than to leave people out of the program. So my understanding is that the business community and the labor community are pretty close. And I'm hoping that in the next few months we'll see something come out of the legislature on this.
Would this apply to a somebody who's part-time?
Yes.
So because it seems to be the way people are going now. Everybody's they're going away from full-time labor whenever they can because of insurance and other issues. So this would mean that a part-time worker would be protected.
Yes. So in order to qualify for the program in the first place, under my bill, you have to satisfy the unemployment standard for minimum work requirement. You don't just get it the first day you're in. Because the premium is paid half by the employer and half by the employee, you take the benefit with you. So if you get an offer of a better job, you don't have to start the clock all over again. If something happens to your child, there's a 1-week waiting period to use the program. So that means it's not that your child had the flu, it's that your child's in the hospital.
I see.
Because and the illness is defined as hospitalized or under constant medical care. So again, it's just not an ear infection. It's a serious medical issue. And if you start a new job and a month later, your poor child is a serious thing, it shouldn't matter that you just got there.
So that means any worker, for example, people who work in McDonald's, as you talked about part-time, so they will also be eligible to participate.
Yeah, it'll just, their benefit would be lower because their weekly
Yeah, of
wage is
course,
lower.
yeah.
It'll just be a percentage of that.
Okay.
And
But
it
that's
might
where
take-
your 80% comes in.
Right, right. It'll take them a little bit longer to qualify.
Okay.
But they would be in. It covers every worker except for a federal worker because
Okay.
we don't have jurisdiction over
Okay.
federal workers, and municipal workers, although the municipality could voluntarily join in.
I see.
And if you own your own business, you could voluntarily join in.
I see.
So,
So the business owner, as an employee, could in fact qualify.
yes, would qualify, but we can't force the employee owner to participate. But they can opt in.
Why would you do this new bill rather than expanding unemployment, which seems to have already the infrastructure and people understand it?
There's
They feel better.
There's enough, we were talking before about the federal involvement and the state involvement, and unemployment is one in which there's enough federal involvement that we couldn't extend unemployment to do that. However, what we are doing is using some of the data from the unemployment office in order to prove employment. You say you work there, that's where we know that you did. During the last administration, we were negotiating to be able to ease some of the restrictions on the use of federal information, infrastructure, and other access in order to get it done. But we're not as fortunate to be able to do that right now.
Okay.
What was also interesting on this program was that in the last administration, I was, speaking of fortunate, I had the opportunity to go to the White House several times because they were very interested in what we were doing here in Massachusetts. The administration's policy or their outlook was, let's see how the states do. And once more states become successful, we can just show that track record, and maybe Congress will become more interested in a program like this. And it wasn't just Massachusetts. We were working with Connecticut. We're working with New York, which has since passed it, with Washington. And I asked the former labor secretary to solve an issue that I had, which was most of us working on this now have nothing to build from. So the states that already had this program already had temporary disability insurance as a matter of a public program. They could build on that because that was all a state program, all funded statewide. And they did, so they offered an additional benefit under a program that existed and put more money into it. But we couldn't, and the states that could do that were exhausted. So I asked the labor secretary, can you provide a template for each of the states trying to do this to work with? Because we're all reinventing the wheel, or inventing it for the first time side by side. And why not use the federal resources to do something that would benefit everybody? Excuse me. And they did that. They put together what they called a Lego kit. They said, you know, take out what you need, put in what you need, just share it. Excuse me. And before they left office, they turned that over to us. So we have that to build with, saving us about $20 million. Excuse me. I'm sorry about this cold.
No. You can take advantage of your own program.
That's true. Well, again, serious medical illness. It's not wouldn't apply. Excuse me.
No, that's I had never heard of that before, and luckily I was never in a situation where I would ever need it. But it was something that you, particularly when you have a family, you have to be thinking about.
Right. I mean,
It's a good. It will be a good program if you can succeed and get it out.
Well, what's nice about it is that it appears that we're going to do it with the cooperation and input of the business community, and that's where I think you know where it works.
Yeah.
There are some things that each of the sides heard that they needed in the program that they never even thought of. Didn't bother them at all, but they wouldn't have thought of it because from their point of view, it's something they just didn't consider. So they're coming together with it. I explored whether private insurance companies could be involved with this type of a program. My ultimate conclusion, working with the insurers, is I don't think they can, but we'll see.
I see. Okay.
As long as it can be done within the same cost.
So you think that the state will become a player in the insurance piece there, or it just
Yeah, the way they're doing it under my bill and the way they do it in Washington is that the state treasurer essentially assembles a fund and then administers that fund and pays
I
the
see.
benefits out of
Okay.
that fund. And in my bill, the attorney general is there to arbitrate any disputes that come.
Okay.
It's fairly
I
straightforward
see.
who qualifies and who doesn't.
I see.
You just have to prove that you work, what you make, and that there's a medical condition, so you have a medical professional certify.
Yes. We only have a couple more minutes. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about?
Well, we're reaching the the sort of the second year. We're in the second year of our term, and we should be able to see now some results coming out of the legislature. People are looking to us for these issues that you're talking about, and others. The budget will come out in the next few months, and we'll see what we can address from that. Some of the things that interest me that will affect Burlington directly is that we're looking for more money for our senior centers. The governor has actually provided some more in his budget for that. I've asked for more money for a program that will assist seniors in their property taxes. We currently have a program where seniors can defer some of their property taxes. The state has a fund where we reimburse the towns and the cities for the non-payment of those, or the deferred payment, I should say.
Deferred payment, I see.
Yeah, of those taxes. It only applies to people. The floor of it is people with $20,000 in income a year
I see,
or
okay.
less. There aren't that many people in Massachusetts whose income is $20,000 or less, even among retired people. I want to raise that cap to $80,000 because what happens is the state again reimburses or pays the town. The town then pays the state back with interest once the property is sold.
I see.
Oftentimes the person has then passed away, is how that would happen. And so the fund just replenishes itself. So it's really not, once it's up and running, and this is now, it's not a cost to the state or to the town, and it just assists the senior in keeping their home
I see.
a little bit longer.
But the taxes will be just deferred.
Deferred, right.
And taken out of the selling
The
price?
sale.
The sale price, right.
I see.
Right. So yes, the seller would retain less money,
Okay.
but during the lifetime of the owner, the senior, they wouldn't have to be burdened with that payment, which is usually the biggest
Yes.
payment that they have.
Yes, that is true. Wow.
Interesting.
So,
I'm learning a great deal more than I
Yes.
thought I was going to learn.
so I propose
thank
that
you.
with respect to the next state budget, and we'll see what happens with that. But we live in a great community, and we've got to just keep going with it.
Well, thank you very, very much for coming by. I understand that with the cold, this was very difficult, but you did a great job.
Thank you for being patient. Thank you at home for being patient. If you've been hearing the coughing.
And hopefully we'll get an opportunity to do this again at some point.
It was fun. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the
Thank you.
invitation.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it. I'll give you a bump. How about
Yes,
that?
thank you.